We wanted to get together to talk business.
Hello and welcome to Superstars Writing Seminars virtual chat with one of the sponsors from 2024, Lisa Mangum. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to get a chance to talk to you between Superstars. So
I love it.
Yeah, awesome. Before we get into you and your role at Shadow Mountain Press, etc., let's talk about you as a writer, because that was, I mean, you were a reader first, obviously, right?
Yeah, I started reading really young. My mom and dad, books were always in our house. They were very supportive and encouraged us to read. Like, they'd buy us books whenever we wanted, me and my brother. And so I grew up being a reader. My mom was a writer as well and an editor. So I kind of also grew up knowing that those were things people did. And so pretty early on, I wanted to be a writer, and I had some ideas, and it took a little while for me to kind of get my feet into the writing world. I actually ended up being an editor first, and then found my way back into being a writer. In 2008, I got an idea for a young adult time travel romance that I wrote and published called the Hourglass Door trilogy, which was really fun. And then I did a standalone young adult contemporary romance called After Hello. And then I've also done some short fiction and some novellas and a few things like that along the way. And I was just sort of, so my books came out 2009, 10, 11, and 12. Very quick succession for those, to the trilogy and the other book. And then in 2014 is when Chris Schobinger asked me to be managing editor for Shadow Mountain, which was what I wanted. And so I was like, yes, please. But that kind of put a hold on my writing, because I wanted to figure out how to do my new job. I'd been in publishing for a really long time, but this was a step up. Really needed to level up all my skills. And so I said, I'm going to put writing down for just a minute and do this. And so I've been sort of balancing both ever since.
Yeah, because I think I met you in 2014. Was it sometime around then at Superstars, when you had just taken on the role, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm curious, because I'm always fascinated by people who dedicate a lot of their time to helping other writers, which is what an editor does, right? You're looking in the slush piles, and you're curating content, and you're working with other writers. So has Lisa Mangum, the author, had to take a back seat while you're doing this?
Yes, to a certain extent. After Hello in 2012, like I mentioned, was my last publication until this year, when I wrote a new book. So that's kind of a long gap between writing that novel and writing this new book, which is nonfiction. But I kind of didn't mind it, because, as you said, I love helping authors with their stories. It's why I got into the editing business. I love finding the stories in the slush pile. I love helping authors do revisions and polish their manuscripts. And so I really allowed myself to fully embrace this new role, the role of being managing editor, and really enjoy it. And then when this new opportunity came up to write a nonfiction book about writing and editing and publishing, I thought, you know what? Now is the time. I'm gonna dive back into the author pool myself and put a book together, which I did.
Awesome. So the book is
It's called Write Fearless, Edit Smart, Get Published, a masterclass for fiction writers. And you may notice that the foreword was written by my dear friend and yours, Kevin Anderson, which I was so grateful that he agreed to write a little something for me at the beginning.
Oh, that's fantastic. And when is it coming out?
It's coming out in January of 2025.
Okay.
It feels like a long time, but in reality, in publishing, it'll be here before I know it. And I'll have advanced reading copies of the book actually this May.
Oh, wow. That's a long lead time. That's great. So getting reviews and stuff like that before the book actually launches.
Plus, I attend a lot of conferences and teach and speak. And so we wanted to have advanced reading copies that I could give away or promote at those conferences to get people aware of it and interested in it.
Oh, that is fantastic. And this is coming up from Shadow Mountain?
Yes. This actually wasn't even on my radar to do. Chris Schobinger last August approached me and said, have you ever thought about putting all of your content, all the classes you teach, all of that information that you've gathered up for all of the 25 plus years into a book? And I'm like, no, not really. And he's like, you should think about it, and Shadow Mountain should publish it. And I'm like, we should.
Yeah.
So I pulled the book together at the end of 2023. And now here we are in 24, getting it ready and doing edits and getting covers done.
And we have a comment. Now we can't see who the Facebook user is, but somebody on Facebook following us at the Superstars Writing Seminars Facebook group says, woo, can't wait to read it. And that's exactly my thought when I saw that, because I mean, I've seen the presentations you've done at Superstars to help writers, and it's so varied in terms of the stuff you've done. I just, that breaking down lyrics is one of the things that you've done to teach us storytelling. I mean, I just love the approach. So what are some of the tips that you would want to share with writers, that, you know, things that they need to know in order to, you know, write fearless, edit smart, get published?
I think one of the main messages I always try to teach, and I want writers to take away, is that there's no one right way to do any of those three things. There's a variety of ways that you can write, whether you're a dedicated outliner, whether you just pants your way through it and play and imagine and then chuck it all and try it again. And even on editing, if you're not great at copy editing, then you don't necessarily have to be. You can employ somebody else or get help to put the commas where they go. And even in getting published, there's no one singular path that everybody takes to get to their destination. So the message I like to tell people is that the path that you're on, whatever path that is that's helping you move forward, increasing your skills, develop your voice, that is the right path for you to be on. And it may not look like anybody else's path, and that is okay, because they're doing their own thing and telling their own stories. That doesn't invalidate your story or your technique, or that somehow you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You're doing it right for you. And I find that helps alleviate some of the burden and the imposter syndrome that we all feel as writers, when you can sort of take a step back and say, you know what, I'm not going to be afraid of what other people are saying. I'm going to just listen to what I need to do myself and tell the best story I can.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So I can't wait. So this book is coming out early in 2025, but there will be people who get sneak peeks if maybe they see you at different conferences that you're going to be at between May and then, right?
Yes. And I will say a few superstars have already read the book and given me endorsements, which is super lovely.
Yeah. Maybe some of them have written the introduction or forward for it.
Yes. If you know, a few people.
That's awesome. Okay. So your role as managing editor at Shadow Mountain Publishing. So what is your primary role? And I guess, what are some of the things that you're constantly looking for that, you know, authors should be aware of?
Shadow Mountain is a mid-sized regional publisher based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. And we have a pretty small team. It's actually grown a little bit in the last year, but we've got 5 people essentially in editorial. Chris Schobinger, Heidi, Kelly, me, Sam, and then Dirk helps us part-time. He also works for another one of our imprints, the other part-time. So that's a pretty small staff. And part of my job is to help with acquisitions. So I'm in charge of the slush pile, reviewing manuscripts that come in, picking out the ones that we need to read and really seriously consider. Then I also work with the authors to help do developmental editing. And then I also do copy editing. So I kind of do all the different phases.
Yeah.
And then I help interface with marketing and design for covers and interiors and log lines and back cover copy, and then sending everything to press. And then, and I do that for about, at any given time, I probably have 12 to 15 books that I'm juggling somewhere in the process. And then I also work with Chris and Heidi and Callie really closely to help build out our span of which books we're going to publish when, the schedule. We do about 20 titles in the spring and about 23 titles in the fall. And we do fiction and nonfiction from middle grade all the way through adult fiction. We do some nonfiction as well. So part of my job is to help manage the schedule and make sure we have the right balance of books, and then also to then go hunting for things that we might be missing. And everybody on that editorial team, brings their best projects to the table, brings their insights, and we all talk about it together to get the right books in the right place.
So you divide it up in terms of the different themes or genres or the imprints, or?
Yeah. So with Shadow Mountain, for example, we have a really robust romance line. Our proper romance line has, I think it's been, it might be 15 years coming up that we've been doing proper romance for 15 years. And so every year we know we're going to do 6 to 8 romances.
Okay.
And we have a pretty robust stable of authors that just continually keep us in books. So we'll place those in. What's Megan doing next? What's Rebecca doing next? Do we have a new author that we're going to bring in? And then we layer in our middle grade fantasy and contemporary, which is another arena that we're really strong in. And we'll, who are our authors? What are we missing? Are we going to try a new genre? And then we just build out from there to say, what are the series that we're continuing? Who are the voices that they're going to deliver a new product for us? And then who's new? Who's the debut? Where's the fresh take? And in all my years, which have been a number of years, I love the fact that at Shadow Mountain, we've always had somewhere on the list a brand new debut, first time, never before been published author in a genre somewhere.
That must feel amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun, especially when it's something that I've found in the slush pile or one of my colleagues has found from a conference or somebody that we've talked to. That sense of finding that manuscript and being like, oh my gosh, this is the one, this is the story, and being able to be enthusiastic and championing it and really getting everybody excited about it at work is one of the things I love about my job.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, when you find that diamond in the rough and you go, "Ooh, this could be something. Let's work together and let's make this." That must be an incredible feeling.
Yeah.
So to get to that, to find those, and this leads to a question that somebody popped up in the Facebook group. Said, on average, how many submissions do you get a week?
That depends on the week, and I say that because Shadow Mountain is closed to unagented submissions, except for once a quarter. So once every 3 months, I open up the slush pile for 1 week for anybody to submit a manuscript, agented or not.
That's a busy week.
So that's a busy week. That week, I can get up to 100 manuscripts in that week. The other weeks, not so much, because those other weeks are reserved for submissions from agents only. And I had to switch that because I used to have upwards of 400 manuscripts in our slush pile at any given time. And we just weren't getting through them. They were in there for years, and that's not fair. So
that's true. Yeah.
So I had
small team, right? You can, and you want to give each manuscript a proper consideration. Right? So
those authors poured their heart and soul into it. They sent me their best. They deserve the best chance at getting reviewed, and I just wasn't having time. So this way, I found we've been doing this process for a couple of years now, and it really has worked well to keep the agented submissions coming in on a regular basis, but then to still find those brand new voices, every quarter that I wouldn't have found otherwise.
Oh, I love that. So the agented submissions are probably not as much of a open the floodgates. They tend to come more in a regular pattern from the various people that you have relationships with, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And so I might get 1 or 2 agented submissions a week.
Okay.
In the in between the open windows,
Right.
which is a good pace. I can keep up on things that are coming in. I can work with the agents a little bit more closely, and excuse me, and everybody gets the news a little bit faster.
Yeah, I think it's the waiting. Though, as Tom Petty said, waiting is the hardest part. Is that Tom
Yes.
Petty who sang that? So the waiting. But he wasn't singing about a manuscript, though.
No, he wasn't.
No. Excuse me. So what I'm curious about is debut authors
Yeah.
coming in via agented submissions versus debut authors that you've discovered in the slush pile.
So do you want some stories of people that I have?
Yes, please. I love those stories.
I have a lot of stories of people I have found in the slush pile, and some of them I've told in my book, shameless plug. One of my favorites, and I always tell this story, is Ali Condi, and you might know her from the #1 New York Times bestselling young adult series Matched. But before that, many years before, she had submitted a manuscript to Shadow Mountain, and she was brand new. She was just getting started, and she sent in 3 chapters of a young adult novel called Yearbook. And it landed in my lap, and I read the 3 chapters, and I'm like, this is really good. Like, there's something here. And I'm like, I need to see the whole thing. Send me the whole thing. So she did, and we worked back and forth, and I had her rewrite it a couple of times, which is kind of a big ask, to be like, I think it's great. Change everything about it. But she did. She stuck with me, and we worked through it. And when she finally turned in that draft, and I read it, and I'm like, yes, this, I knew in my bones this was going to be the book. And sure enough, I ran it through all the approvals, and I found out later from Ali that of everybody that she had sent those 3 chapters to, I was the only person that wrote back asking for a full submission.
Well, and you must go, what? Well, how?
I know, they were great.
How could they not want it?
They were so great. And so I worked with Ali on her 5 books that we published. And while it was when she had turned in her most recent manuscript at the time, her 5th manuscript to us, she said, I'm working on another project. I don't think it's quite right for Shadow Mountain, but I'd love your take on it. And the manuscript she gave me was for Matched. And I read it, and I'm like, Ali, you don't even know. This is the book. This is your breakout book. This is going to change everything. And so that was really, really fun to be able to help her. We were both learning, because she was new at being an author, and I was new at being an editor. She was one of my first authors where I was in charge of her project 100%. I had helped on other things, but I really, like, from slush pile to publication, the 2 of us were a team. And so I loved then seeing her use that manuscript to get her dream agent to pitch to a big New York house, to end up on the New York Times bestseller list. And now she's gone on and done amazing things. But I've always helped that little star on my lapel, like, yeah, but I found her first. I read her first.
I love those stories, especially because, again, like you said, nobody else had wanted that back. And you're thanking your stars that manuscript came across your threshold, and you got a chance to work with her, and that's phenomenal.
It also illustrates that it only takes one person. You're going to get a lot of rejections. Authors get lots and lots of rejections, and a lot of paths that feel like dead ends. But it truly only takes one person to read one thing and to have everything turn.
I love that. So you talked a little bit about the team. You got to work as a team.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear more about that value or that importance of. I mean, a lot of times writers may see editors as adversaries, people trying to block them from getting into publishing. But it is really the right match, the right team. Can you talk a little bit about the value of the author and editor working together?
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about my job is getting to know the author and building that relationship with them and becoming friends with them, because my job is to help support the author and to help support the story, to help bridge the gap between the author and the reader. Like, I tell people this all the time, like, authors get all of the glory and editors get all of the blame. And that's okay. I'm supposed to take all of the blame. If there's a mistake in the book, I want them to say it was my fault and not the author's fault, because it might be my fault. Let's be real. We're human too. But having an editor on your team, the value that it brings is you've got somebody in your corner that you can brainstorm with at the drop of a hat. You've got somebody who can bring fresh eyes to your manuscript, who can see things that maybe you missed. Part of my job is also to challenge authors and say, I know you can do better. I know you can tighten up this scene or increase the tension or have a better ending. And my job is to help push an author to really reach for those heights that maybe they didn't even know they had in them. And then it's also to help alleviate some of the burden. Once you're done, you hand me the book, and then you don't have to think about it for a little while. I'm going to think about it all the time. And you can go on and do another project or take a break. And then when you come back to the manuscript to look at my edits, you've had a little bit of distance and you can be like, oh yeah, that's a good change. Or I don't like that, but let's change it like this. And that dialogue and that conversation becomes really valuable, because what we end up with is the best book that we can deliver to the reader. And that's what we're trying to do, is make the reader experience effortless for them to fall into that story.
I love that. And so when we talked about your book that's coming out in February, you talked about that's a long time, but it's not really a long time when you think about it, because what's the typical, author submits manuscript and this is one that you like, and there's the back and forth. What's that estimated timeline on average? And I know it's going to vary, right, with different authors.
The thing that varies the most is the acquisition part, the submission, the reading, the approvals, because that can depend on how many people are reading it and what else is going on. But once we've got an approved manuscript, like, yes, this is the one we want, everybody wants to do it, I want that to be a year from the release date. Partly that makes it easy for me. So if I'm like, oh, we want your book to be out in October, that means I need your manuscript October of the year before. And then that way, that gives us enough time to do 2 or 3 months, 3 or 4 months of additional developmental editing, copy edits, getting everything prepped so that the ARCs can go to press and come back at least 6 months prior to the release date. And that's important because those ARCs are what we send to the trade reviews like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and Library Journal, forward reviews, in order to get reviews. And for children's books, that's extra important, because you need to have at least 2 positive reviews from trade journals in many cases to be considered for school awards or state awards, which can become really valuable and important for marketing and sales on children's books. So there's a lot of sort of like layers that go into that, hitting those milestone deadlines. So if ARCs go to press on time and the final book goes to press on time and the book is out on time, then everything lines up when marketing comes into play to promote it, and hopefully everybody sees it at the same time and everybody buys it and everybody's happy. But it takes that long, about a year.
Right.
Picture books take a little longer for the art, but that's usually my rule of thumb.
Okay, cool. So Shadow Mountain is a relatively smaller, mid-sized publisher.
Mm-hmm.
I know with some publishing houses, the developmental editor is the acquisitions editor, may also be the developmental editor. That usually goes hand in hand in my experiences. But then there's also copy editors that are different. You do all roles, obviously.
Yeah, I do all roles, in part because that was how I was trained, and that's what from the early days, I just learned how to do all of it. So I'm very comfortable doing all stages of that sort of editorial process. But in bigger houses, or houses that have a bigger staff, then yes, you could have one person that does acquisition, you could have one person that does developmental editing, and you could have somebody else that does copy edits as well.
Right.
And there have been times when my workload is such that I can't get to everything, where I have freelanced out the copy edit to somebody else, because that's a little bit more like just follow the rules. Did we follow the style? Is everything spelled correctly, capitalized correctly? Where developmental editing can be a little bit more creative and artistic and a little bit more fluid. And that's a little bit harder to freelance out. So I still tend to try to do that.
I can imagine then that there's a value for the author in having the person who saw its potential in the submission, worked with them to develop it into what it could be if they work together, and then is all working all the way through. So it's not like you have to go on a date with a new editor, right? And over coffee discover, oh, I guess we don't see eye to eye on these things, because you can shepherd it all the way through. And so you don't have to go back. And I think about like a doctor, when your doctor retires and then somebody who didn't know you as well, they only have the file to look at you. They don't understand some of the personal nuances that really go into a successful relationship. I can imagine that makes that process different, obviously, and potentially a lot easier, or maybe it takes less time because you're not starting something new. You already know this project, maybe.
Yeah, it does. It helps if I've been in on the ground floor of a project. It does help speed up the time it takes to get to the top, so to speak. It also helps if I've worked with the author before. So and I think most authors and editors will find this, like, you work with the same person year after year after year. Every time they turn a manuscript in, like, I'm the person, even if it's not part of a series, because I've learned now, I'm learning the author's voice with every project. I know what their bad habits are. I know what they're capable of. I know what I can say, you know what, don't worry about that. We'll fix it in post, and every book is a little different because every author is a little different, but knowing that backstory of the author and the relationship does help me get their book to where they want it to be a little bit faster and a little bit smoother, rather than, like you said, having to hand it off to a brand new person who maybe doesn't have that background.
Oh, I can imagine that. And then the satisfaction too of what it's kind of like watching the child then graduate and then go on to a career. And it's kind of like you get to be proud of them all the way along because yes, we did this together. You mentioned something, you say, the author's in the spotlight, and then if there's any errors, blame the editor. But I do remember, and I think it was Stephen King in his notes at the end of his books, that he will often say, my editor is great. All of the good things in the book are because I listened to their advice, and any of the things I screwed up, that's probably because I didn't listen to them. And that, like, takes some humility for an author to admit that, right?
Yes. And that is true. There have been plenty of times where I have made a suggestion, or maybe a little bit more forceful than a suggestion, on a point that the author didn't take. And then I'm like, well, I did my best. Like, I told you, and I'm trying to protect you from your future self, because the readers they might not be as nice. Yeah. But, when I talk about editors taking the blame, it's usually because, readers don't talk about books in the way of, it was so much fun to read because there wasn't a comma splice anywhere in the book. And that was just so refreshing to read. Yeah. And, like, the semicolons were just so sublime. Like, readers don't say that. But because a good editor, a good copy editor, that becomes invisible. But how many times as a reader have you thrown a book across the room or been upset and said, where was the editor? Why didn't the editor tell the author to fix it? Well,
right. Yeah.
Sometimes we did, and the author didn't. So it goes back to that teamwork and that trust that the author, I want to build with the author so that they trust that I'm trying to do my very best, and that I'm trusting them to also do their very best.
I have a personal experience with an editor for a nonfiction book that I did on haunted bookstores and libraries. And I'm a book nerd just through and through. Can't have enough books, right? If you think you have enough, you need twice as many. So when I was writing this, I was doing a chapter on Haslam's bookstore in St. Pete Beach in Florida. And because it was associated with the development of the American Booksellers Association, like the royalty of bookishness.
Ooh, yeah.
And it's really a story about the ghost of Jack Kerouac. But I went on.
That's cool.
for 3,000 or 4,000 words in the chapter about the history of book selling and how this Haslam family was curated that whole thing and how great that is. And I had a blast. And my developmental editor said, "Really, Mark? They're here for the ghosts. What are you doing?" And I fought them because I am so passionate about loving books and bookstores. We fought, and I was very obstinate. And then my developmental editor came up with a great idea. Why don't we do a sidebar? We'll take this chapter and a couple other chapters where I kind of got a little out of hand, and we'll make it a sidebar. So the book nerds who want it can jump into it, but it doesn't lose the flow.
Yeah.
And I begrudgingly said, "All right," because I had this thing, and I'll never forget when I got the final, like the galleys for proofing, and I read it, and I called her up and I said, "You're so right. I am so sorry. I was such a PETA about this. I really, you had a great vision, and I didn't see it until the final." So you guys pull, and they did the work of pulling out the sidebar. Like I suggested some things, and it was just one of those cases of like, oh my God, I'm one of those authors.
I didn't think I'd be one of those authors, but I love the story. My takeaway of the story is working to find a third option. Sometimes that's the solution. The author may have said, "This is my vision," and the editor says, "That doesn't work, that you can't do it that way." And rather than butting heads or trying to, stand your ground, the best solution is to come up with a third alternative that actually probably was the best solution. And it takes both of you working to say, okay, well, neither of us is going to be happy, so let's find something else.
And hope that works. And I guess it's my reminder that, yes, I usually follow 95% of my editor's suggestions. There are some things I'm just too obstinate about. and then when it comes out, I usually go, "Oh, I guess I should have." You see that one review and you're like, "Yeah, they told me to do that. Whoops." So you said you open up every quarter. So for anyone watching this, when's the next opening, or is that like a wild turkey surprise when you announce it?
No, I always open it's the first week of March, the first week of June, the first week of September, and the first week of December. So the 1st through the 7th, whenever that falls in the week. Those are the 7 days that we open for unsolicited, unagented manuscripts. Send me your stories, send me your queries. Let me see what you're working on. Maybe.
And so the guidelines are obviously at shadowmountain.com, but where can people, what are the things what are you hoping to see? I know, it's like, what are you hoping to see? Something good. Yeah, I know, but.
Yeah, I'm really hunting hard for young adult fantasy, young adult romance, young adult romantasy, which is kind of, that hybrid of the two. We're really pushing hard to increase our footprint in that arena. So I would love to find some more really strong YA. I'm also always in the hunt for historical fiction for adults, ideally based on a true story or inspired by a true story. That always seems to sort of elevate it a little bit higher. And then for middle grade, we're kind of getting into a little bit of the creepy, spooky, mystery, horror arena. So nothing too scary, because we're still, a publisher for clean fiction and family-friendly general, kinds of reading. But a little bit of an edge it seems to be in the marketplace right now. So I'm also kind of keeping an eye out for that.
Cool. Awesome. And then you also, right now you're working on the 10th anniversary, the 10th edition of a very special anthology that you've been editing for Wordfire Press for Superstars Writing Seminars. Can you talk a little bit about the origin of that and what the new one is that you're working on?
Yeah. One of the things that I love about the Superstars Writing Seminar, my very first year that I went, which now is 10 or 11 years ago, Kevin and Rebecca had told this story about writing, being a professional, and if somebody asks you to write a story about, a purple unicorn, you write the best purple unicorn story that you can. And I heard that and I was half joking, and I'm like, well, now I want to read a story about a purple unicorn. And that kind of grew into this idea of what if we did an anthology of all purple unicorn stories from the Superstars Writing Seminar alumni and attendees. And I would edit it, WordFire would publish it, and the proceeds would go to the scholarship fund. And we had so much fun doing it that we've now done it every year since, which was not my intention at the beginning.
No,
but
I know it just kind of grew, right?
Yeah, every year I'm like, well, that was good, and then I'm either like, oh, I've got a good idea, or Kevin's like, we should do this, or somebody else is like, what are we gonna do? So the new one that we're doing is called Weird Wilderness, a cryptid bestiary, and it is going to be stories about cryptids like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or the Chupacabra, and stories either from the point of view of the cryptid or from the cryptozoologist or some element like that. I see somebody had a question of how many submissions have I gotten so far for the new Superstars anthology. I just had 2 that came in last night, so I think that puts me up to 22. I'm really hoping I traditionally get at least 80. So the deadline is next week, and I'm expecting then a flood. I'm hoping for a flood of stories to come in.
Isn't that always the case? A lot of writers waiting to I mean, in my experience, it's like that last couple days of the open period. You're like, whoa. The
deadline's here. Let me hurry and get it in. But one of the reasons why I like doing this process is because it gives the authors a quick experience through the whole process of writing to a theme, writing to a deadline, writing to a specific word count, and then going through the process of reviews and acceptance or rejection, feedback, edits, publication.
Wow.
And then they have a little publishing credit under their belt.
Which is amazing. I mean, and here's the cool thing about this. So it goes to the scholarship. It's basically you've donated a lot of your time, and the writers are agreeing to submit something so that the funds can go to the scholarship fund, which is great. But it's only open to people who have attended Superstars, right? So alumni. As well as, I guess, whatever. So if you've attended Superstars, you're eligible to submit. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I wanted to keep this unique and exclusive to the Superstars Writing Seminar because I don't freelance edit anything else. Like, I don't have time to work on any other projects.
Yeah.
But I've loved the conference so much. I love the people at the conference. And I think the quality of the writing that I see from those stories it's just such a high level and I just love it. So every year I'm like, let's do it again. So.
And just last week I was on a road trip to Ottawa, Ontario, and it was just a long enough trip that there and back I got to enjoy listening to A Bit of Luck, the Eric Flint, in honor of Eric Flint, founder of one of the co-founders of Superstars Writing Seminars. It's just really amazing. It just every single story, it was something really. I mean, especially the opening story that really got me. Because well, I get if you knew Eric, but there's these little sort of little nods throughout it. So some other comments from folks. So someone says, I really appreciate that you post a little feedback on each story and then yes, no, maybe. So you can talk about that, how you do that?
Yeah. So once all the submissions have come in and I turn to reading them and deciding which ones are actually going to be in the anthology, I'll go onto the Facebook group, the Superstars Facebook group, and I will post fairly anonymous reaction and feedback on each story. So I'll say, story number 1, and I'll give 2 or 3 sentences about what's working and what's not working, what I'm liking about it, where the story fell down, anything like that. And then I always say if it's going into the yes pile or the maybe pile or this is a no. And I love doing that because you start to see some similar things come up. Like this story, the ending didn't satisfy me. It felt like the end of a chapter and not the end of a story. And so collectively, even if that wasn't your story, that's a good note to have in mind for an author to be like, I need to make sure that my short story ends like a story and not like a chapter, because that's something that's a deal breaker from an editor's point of view when they're looking at my story. So I'll talk about voice, I'll talk about tension or suspense, or that maybe the stakes aren't high enough, as a way to sort of globally say, these are the things that are important as I am reviewing a manuscript. Plus, then it's also a lot of fun for me to sit back and watch everybody panic, thinking that every single no was their story.
Of course, yeah, because you don't really reveal anything about it. But what I love about that is it helps the tribe, it helps the Superstars members, because that's where you're posting it.
Mm-hmm.
It helps them understand what's going through the mind of an editor,
Yeah.
and what worked for them, which is going to be different. Like if Kevin Anderson was editing it as opposed to you, there would be a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
As well. So really understanding the insights into Lisa. So that's kind of like, okay, I'm learning. So how important then is it for a writer? And this is, maybe a plug for coming to meet Lisa at Superstars or to meet. How important is it for a writer to really understand who they're pitching to, who they're sending a story to?
I think that can be really, really important, because if you're pitching your story to an editor or a house or an agent that just doesn't even do what you do, then it's always going to be a no. And and you can save yourself some heartache and some panic by not putting yourself in a position where the answer is just automatically going to be no, through no fault of your own or your story. It's just, we don't do that. And so researching the agent, researching the publishing house or the editor that you want to talk to, find out what their house does, what their specialty is, what they're passionate about, and then saying, I have exactly the story that you're looking for. That's going to put you to the head of the line, and it will be much easier for me to say yes, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is everything that I love. How did you know? And then that can ease the path to getting an acceptance in a contract.
Awesome. So opportunities then to, when you get a chance to go see Lisa speak in person somewhere or virtual like this, take advantage of it. Maybe checking out, shadowmountain.com just to see what they're publishing. And then obviously, like, sometimes maybe you get a feel for what Lisa likes when you follow her on social media, like Instagram, author Lisa Mangum. Or
there you will see mostly pictures of my cat Loki.
Well, there you go. Your cat Loki. But I mean, that may give you an insight. So if a story opens where something bad happens to a cat, that may be something it's going to turn you off.
Yeah,
right?
that might not be a great story.
Yeah, exactly. So Lisa, thanks again so much for hanging out with me today. So you've got the book coming out, and I'm just going to pop it up again. You got the book coming out, Write Fearless, Edit Smart, Get Published, coming out January 2025. I'm going to go pre-order this right now, so I get a signed copy when I see you in February 2025.
Yeah. I will have finished copies at Superstars next year.
Awesome.
Everybody can buy a copy there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Lisa, thanks again so much for hanging out with me today.
Hey, thank you. It was great fun.
All right. Take care. It's just a reminder, you can check us out, superstarswriting.com. Great place where you can get to hang out with awesome people like Lisa. Lisa, thanks again.
Thanks.